Earlier this week, President Trump tweeted that the United States needs, quote, a good shutdown this fall to fix the mess in Congress. The tweets were apparently aimed at defending a compromised spending package that Congress is likely to clear this week, but does not accomplish some of Trump's goals, such as building the wall between the United States and Mexico. Plus, it's questionable whether the Republicans have the votes for the health reform they are seeking. Joining us to talk about these issues, please welcome to Open, the owner of Retro-Vison Media. Welcome back, Lee Bines. Nice to have you.
Good to be back.
So what do you make of a president who talks openly about shutting down Congress and says, you know what, and shutting down the government, you know what, this might actually be a good idea?
Well, I think he needs a lesson in counting, for number one. He should have known going into this budget process that he didn't have enough votes, a supermajority in the Senate in order to get what he wanted. The Democrats finally had a little power and they were able to sit on their hands and not do anything. So in not doing so, it forced him to kind of give up a lot of things that he wanted to get through on the budget, save for the military carve out for $24-some-odd billion. But yeah, if he had any idea how Congress really worked, he would not have made that statement. Moreover, the fact that he's running the show. The Republicans have the House, they have the Senate, and the White House. If he shuts the government down, it's on the Republicans 100%. If the government is shut down, we're talking about 800,000 federal employees that'll be out of work, and as many as another million placed on furlough where they wouldn't have any idea when they were going to get paid. If he wants to walk into a situation like that either now or in September, it boggles the mind.
Does that become an effective tactic?
Threatening your own party? I don't think so. I think what he's essentially doing is just making a lot of enemies for himself on his side of the aisle. And a lot of people are very, very nervous whether they're willing to come out and speak in front of the cameras or not. But more and more people in the administration is having to come out and explain what he really meant on a daily basis, and I think that's wearing thin.
The laws of our country state that we need 60 votes in order to pass legislation.
Mm-hmm.
The president tweeted very recently that he decried that idea, and he said, you know what, maybe we ought to just make it a simple majority. And this was reflected by some of his supporters and some of his assistants. What do you make of that, number one? And number two, is that actually possible for them to get into the rules and change those rules?
Well, the supermajority rule has been in effect for a long time for the purpose, for one simple purpose, is to make sure that you come as close to a mandate on whatever legislation or whatever person being placed into office through a nomination process as you could possibly get. If you drop it down to 51%, like they had to do to get Neil Gorsuch approved, if you place that in the legislative process, you're going to find even more chaos than exists right now. And that's difficult to imagine, but that's what he wants to do.
On a similar note, Reince Priebus talked about actually changing the First Amendment of the Constitution, making it so that the government was going to be able to sue reporters or commentators or journalists who publish things that the government doesn't necessarily agree with. You know, he can say that the process of, changing an amendment to the Constitution is not as easy as just like raising a couple of hands and
no, and
voting.
you know what? Even though that's a good thing, that's going to be difficult for them to do. It's nerve-wracking that they're trying.
That they would even suggest.
That they would even make the suggestion. And especially this week, as a matter of fact, this is a week of supporting freedom of the press globally for a lot of things that have been happening in a lot of the countries that Donald Trump himself are actually supporting, in Egypt and Turkey. That, as a matter of fact, have been shutting down the internet and locking up journalists on a regular basis, and opposition parties and things like that, because they don't like what's happening. So for Donald Trump to be putting forth an idea like this in this particular environment is strange, to say the least.
It's been reported, I think it was literally yesterday, that President Trump had a conversation with Vladimir Putin in Russia, and they talked about having either a conference or getting the two governments together to figure out how to sort through Syria. There were many people who were very skeptical that this could be done. On the other hand, dialogue has to be seen as a good thing. What do you make of this, and are there prospects for helping to sort out what might happen in Syria if the United States and Russia, President Trump and Vladimir Putin, get together?
Well, considering the United States and
I
Russia...
guess I'm asking you to throw them a bone.
Well, considering the United States...
But valid or not, I don't know.
Okay. Well, the two nations are opposite, diametrically opposed to what's happening in Syria right now. I don't see any deals to be made there. If Donald Trump considers himself the deal maker in chief, but he hasn't really made too many deals lately, if any at all, quite frankly. So not having access to the data, what actually transpired in that phone call, I would think it was more show and tell than any substance moving forward.
Why do you think things like the dialogue the president had over the Civil War and Andrew Jackson, which just were not historically correct and not based on facts that many of us have learned in whether it be grade school, middle school, or high school or college, what do you make about the fact that he says those things and yet his supporters don't seem bothered by that? That to me is a very strange phenomenon. One would think that anybody, regardless of political party, would want their president to be historically correct, knowledgeable, and when they show that they're not so, would say, you know what, maybe this isn't the right guy. But the polls show the supporters are still right with him.
Well, you know what, I do a daily podcast at my website, Issues Under Fire, and I referred to Donald Trump, and I did not want to seem insulting as an ignoramus. That's the root of it, is ignorant. And as a kid growing up, my parents used to tell me all the time that money was the root of all evil. That's not true. Ignorance is the root of all evil, and that's one of the reasons why I believe there's so many people are kind of like upset when they realize his learning curve is huge, literally huge. And one of the reasons I believe, and I don't want to be insulting to his supporters like Hillary Clinton, call them deplorable or anything like that, but his base support is high school educated white males not doing very well in the country, and they may suffer from the same degree of ignorance that Donald Trump does. So when he says these things, they're not fact checking. So, that's why his support is holding.
The Republicans are trying everything they can to get a reform health bill passed. You read one thing one day, then something different the next day. What do you think the prospects are? Because they're talking about, today's Wednesday, so maybe even by Thursday, before they take a break in Congress, that they actually would have a reform bill. What do you think?
Well, several weeks ago I was on this show, and we were talking about the exact same thing prior to Congress leaving for their Easter break. They went and tried to push forward something so that they would at least possibly have something to tell their constituents when they got back and didn't have to face holy hell. We're seeing that same thing occurring right now this week, and they're supposed to leave on Thursday to take off another week. Those people have to go back to their constituents and explain to them why nothing's been done. If they can go back and say that we're still working on it, that gives them another week to breathe. But eventually, I believe that the country is going to come to the conclusion that there is no plan. There never has been a plan. The only plan that they really had envisioned was repealing it, but there was no replacement. It just does not exist. It doesn't exist in a capitalist system. We discussed this before. It cannot happen.
They're stuck on pre-existing conditions. It seems like that is, I guess there are many sticking points, but that is the central one, certainly, that's being reported right now. Is there any way that this could pass and remove and include a removal of pre-existing conditions?
Doubtful. The numbers, the statistics, the polls don't support it. We have about only 17% of the people polled agreed with the previous plan that they tried to get through. That's why it didn't get through. I don't think they made it any better. I don't see it going any further. Essentially, we're going to have Obamacare, like it or not. It's going to have to be repaired, not replaced.
Lee Bines from Retro-Vison Media, thank you so much. It's
good to
always
be here.
great to have you, and he says what he thinks. Isn't it a beautiful thing? Folks, stay tuned. We will be right back with more Open right after these messages.